A downed line doesn't care what a dashboard says about it. I've spent 19 years working storm restoration for Kestrel Valley Electric, first as an apprentice lineman, then for the last 8 as a crew foreman, and the one rule I learned before almost anything else, the rule that's kept every man and woman on my crew alive across 19 storm seasons, is that you ground a line yourself with your own hands before you ever touch it, no matter how many systems upstream have already told you it's dead. My name is Theo Kastner. My uncle, Warren, is Kestrel Valley's Vice President of Grid Modernization, the man who spent the last 3 years championing a cross-utility coordination platform called Circuit Sync, built to automate exactly the kind of de-energization confirmations that used to take our dispatch center 20 minutes of phone calls to 3 separate utilities during a bad storm. This is a story about an ice storm in January, a downed 34,000-volt line my crew was sent to repair, and a confirmed dead status on my uncle's dashboard that turned out to be exactly wrong, at exactly the moment it mattered most. Circuit Sync went live across our region's 3 interconnected utilities 2 years ago, a platform designed to automate the de-energization confirmation process for storm restoration crews working lines that cross jurisdictional boundaries between Kestrel Valley Electric and our 2 neighboring utilities, Alden Power and Ridgeline Cooperative. Before Circuit Sync, confirming a cross-boundary line was dead meant a dispatcher on our end calling a dispatcher at whichever neighboring utility owned the upstream switching gear, verbally confirming the switch position, and logging the confirmation by hand, a process that reliably worked but that could eat 20 or 30 minutes during a major storm. Minutes that mattered enormously when half a county was sitting without heat in freezing temperatures. My uncle had pushed hard for Circuit Sync from the earliest proposal, arguing, correctly, that 3 utilities coordinating switch status entirely by phone call during a major regional storm, when every dispatcher at every utility was buried under 100 simultaneous emergencies, was exactly the kind of process automation could meaningfully speed up without cutting any real safety corner. Circuit Sync pulls switch position directly off each utility's own SCADA system. Theo, he told me, at a family dinner not long after the system's rollout, it's not a phone call anymore, it's the actual switch telling the actual system what position it's in real time, across all 3 utilities. That's more reliable than any dispatcher relaying a verbal confirmation, not less. I don't doubt the switch data's accurate most of the time, Uncle Warren. What I'm telling you is that, the switch says it's open and the line is actually de-energized aren't always the same fact, especially during a storm bad enough that switching gear itself is getting stressed in ways it doesn't see on a normal day, and I've never once grounded a line off a dashboard reading instead of my own test, and I'm not planning to start now. I want to be fair to what Circuit Sync actually got right, because this isn't a story about a system built carelessly, or an uncle who'd stopped caring about the crews working his utilities lines the moment he moved from the field into an office. Circuit Sync's cross-utility confirmation had cut average storm restoration times across our 3-utility region by nearly a third over 2 storm seasons, a genuinely significant improvement that meant real families getting their heat back measurably faster, and my uncle had built his entire second career, after 11 years himself as a lineman before a shoulder injury moved him into management, on exactly this kind of careful engineering. What the system didn't have, and what nobody building it had fully understood the danger of, was any way to independently verify that a neighboring utility's own SCADA feed was itself accurately reflecting the true physical state of a switch, when that switch, or the communications relay reporting its position, could itself fail or misreport during the exact kind of severe weather that made storm restoration necessary in the first place. I need to explain the specific hazard this story turns on, because it's the actual center of everything that happened that January night, and because it's exactly the kind of hidden electrical pathway a status confirmation system, built to trust a neighboring utility's own reported switch position, was never designed to independently catch. The specific line my crew was dispatched to repair that night, a 34,000-volt distribution feeder running along Route 9, normally received power exclusively from a Kestrel Valley substation roughly 4 miles north. What Circuit Sync's dashboard didn't fully weight, because the tie configuration was a relatively unusual regional backup arrangement rarely activated outside major emergencies, was that Ridgeline Cooperative maintained an automatic tie switch roughly 2 miles east of our damage site, a backup connection designed to automatically energize our Route 9 feeder from Ridgeline's own grid if Kestrel Valley's primary supply dropped out, specifically to keep critical infrastructure like a regional hospital further down that same feeder powered during exactly this kind of major storm outage. That automatic tie had triggered correctly earlier that evening when our own substation went down in the storm, silently backfeeding power into the Route 9 line from Ridgeline's grid, exactly as the tie switch was designed to do. What had gone wrong was a communications relay failure on Ridgeline's end, a piece of equipment itself damaged by the same ice storm, that caused their SCADA system to continue reporting the tie switch as open, its pre-storm status, rather than the closed, energized position it had actually been sitting in for the better part of an hour by the time Circuit Sync pulled that status into its cross-utility confirmation for our crew's work order. I'd raised a version of this exact concern with my uncle nearly a year before this story's events, after a training exercise had surfaced the theoretical existence of that Ridgeline tie switch and its automatic activation logic during a tabletop review of the region's emergency backfeed configurations. Circuit Sync pulls Ridgeline switch status directly, Theo. If their tie switch shows open, it's open, the system's not guessing, it's reading the actual SCADA data. I understand it's reading their data, Uncle Warren. What I'm telling you is that their data is only as good as whatever equipment is reporting it, and during a storm bad enough to knock out 3 utilities worth of primary supplies simultaneously, that's exactly the kind of storm where a communications relay on somebody else's system could fail right alongside everything else that's failing that night. I ground every line myself before my crew touches it, every single time, storm or no storm, dashboard confirmation or no dashboard confirmation, and I need this crew to keep doing exactly that even after Circuit Sync tells us a line's already confirmed dead. I remembered the tabletop exercise itself in more detail than I think my uncle ever fully appreciated, a training session run by our regional reliability coordinator specifically to walk crews through the handful of automatic backup configurations scattered across our 3 utility service territory, most of which existed purely on paper and had never actually activated in the field during my 19 years. The Route 9 hospital tie had been one of maybe 6 such configurations discussed that afternoon, presented almost as a footnote, a piece of trivia about how the grid protected critical infrastructure during exactly the kind of catastrophic multi-utility outage none of us in that training room had ever personally lived through. I remember raising my hand and asking, half rhetorically, what would happen if the tie switch itself activated correctly but the system reporting its status didn't, and I remember the reliability coordinator admitting, honestly, that nobody had specifically modeled that scenario, because it required 2 independent failures happening in exactly the wrong sequence at exactly the wrong time. I'd filed that answer away the way I filed away most theoretical hazards across 19 years of storm work, not with any particular certainty it would ever matter, but with the same habit that had me testing every line myself regardless of what any dashboard told me, because the entire discipline of this trade was built on treating the theoretical failure as though it might be the one sitting in front of you on any given night. The night this story turns on was the 3rd week of January, a severe ice storm having knocked out power across roughly 40% of our 3 utility region. My crew dispatched to a downed section of the Route 9 feeder where a fallen tree limb had taken the line to the ground roughly a mile north of the regional hospital it fed. Circuit Sync's work order, generated automatically once our dispatch center logged the damage report, showed the line confirmed de-energized, Kestrel Valley's own substation breaker open following the earlier outage, and Ridgeline's tie switch confirmed open per their own SCADA feed, a clean, fully cross-verified deadline confirmation across both utilities involved. I pulled up to the damaged site with my crew a little past 11 that night, temperatures well below freezing, ice still coating every surface, and felt the particular urgency of a hospital 4 miles down that same feeder running on backup generators that weren't rated for an indefinite outage. My apprentice, a sharp young lineman named Nate barely 18 months into the trade, had the grounding equipment out of the truck before I'd even finished my own visual inspection of the downed line, eager to get the repair moving given the pressure everyone on the crew felt with a hospital's generators counting down somewhere behind us in the dark. Lines confirmed dead on Circuit Sync, boss, both utilities cross-checked. We could probably skip straight to the splice and save 15 minutes, given the hospital load down the line. We ground it first, every time, Nate, exactly like I've told you every single storm since you started with this crew. A confirmed status on a screen is a good reason to move fast, it's never a reason to skip the one test that actually tells us what's true. Get the hot stick and the grounding clamp, we're testing this line before anybody's hands go anywhere near it. I want to describe what I actually did next, because it fell squarely within my formal authority as crew foreman and, honestly, within the one procedure Kestrel Valley's own safety manual had never once made optional regardless of any dashboard confirmation, a mandatory hot stick voltage test and physical grounding of any de-energized line before crew contact. A rule I'd followed without exception across 19 years and that Circuit Sync's rollout had, if anything, made a handful of crews across the region quietly less rigorous about, given how reliable the automated confirmations had proven across 2 clean storm seasons. I took the hot stick myself, extended it toward the downed conductor while Nate and the rest of the crew held well clear, the particular ritual I'd performed thousands of times across 19 years reduced, as it always was, to a handful of seconds that felt considerably longer standing in freezing wind with ice cracking somewhere in the dark canopy overhead. I remember the specific weight of the stick in my gloved hands, the practiced care of keeping my body positioned exactly where it needed to be if the reading came back wrong, a posture so thoroughly drilled into me across 2 decades that I barely had to think about it consciously anymore, even as some part of my attention registered, distantly, that a hospital's backup generators were counting down somewhere down that same feeder while I took my time doing a test the dashboard had already told. The whole crew was unnecessary. I felt the particular cold drop in my stomach as the stick's indicator lit, unmistakably, for live voltage, on a line Circuit Sync's dashboard, cross-verified across 2 separate utilities, had confirmed dead not 11 minutes earlier. Lines hot, everybody back, now. I called it loud enough for the whole crew to hear over the wind, waving Nate and the 2 others well clear of the downed conductor, my own pulse considerably less calm than my voice as I ran the hot stick a second time along a different section of the line, confirming the same live reading. A 34,000-volt feeder sitting fully energized on the ground exactly where Circuit Sync's confirmed dead work order had told my crew it was safe to begin splicing. I radioed dispatch immediately, reporting a confirmed deadline testing live, a report serious enough that it triggered an automatic regional alert across all 3 utilities within minutes, dispatch scrambling to reach Ridgeline's own control center directly by phone rather than trusting Circuit Sync's automated feed for anything further that night. It took Ridgeline's dispatcher nearly 20 minutes to physically confirm, through a technician sent out to the tie switch location itself, what had actually happened. Their automatic tie switch had closed hours earlier exactly as designed, backfeeding the Route 9 line to keep the hospital powered, while a storm-damaged communications relay had continued silently reporting the switch's old, pre-storm open status to Circuit Sync's cross-utility feed the entire time, a genuine equipment failure on Ridgeline's end that neither utility's dispatch center nor Circuit Sync itself had any way to detect without someone physically laying eyes on the switch. Theo, I've got Ridgeline's tie switch confirmed physically closed as of about an hour before your crew arrived, dispatch told me over the radio, her voice carrying the specific flat calm of someone who just watched a genuinely serious near-miss resolve itself correctly. Communications relay failure on their end, storm damage, nobody caught it because nobody had a reason to physically check a switch the system was confidently reporting as open the whole time. I stood there in the freezing dark with my crew, all of us quiet for a moment, watching the downed line that Circuit Sync had confirmed dead sitting there fully energized, exactly the line Nate had wanted to start splicing not 15 minutes earlier on nothing more than a clean cross-utility confirmation neither of us had any reason, on paper, to doubt. My uncle drove out to the site himself before dawn, having been woken by the regional alert his own system had triggered, and I want to describe the conversation honestly, because it wasn't simple vindication for either of us, even with a live hot stick reading and a confirmed relay failure sitting in hard fact in front of both our eyes. A confirmed dead cross-utility status that was actually a live 34,000-volt line, Theo. If Nate had started that splice before your test, we're not talking about a close call anymore. I've been telling you for a year that Circuit Sync's confirmation is only as good as the equipment reporting into it, Uncle Warren. I didn't have anything beyond a tabletop scenario and 19 years of never skipping a ground test until tonight made the gap impossible to keep deferring. This wasn't the system lying to us, it was the system trusting a relay that was itself failing, and neither one of us had a way to know that until somebody physically tested the line with their own hands. Which is exactly the gap I need to sit with, and I know that now in a way I genuinely didn't let myself believe a year ago, when you first raised it at that dinner. I wasn't dismissing you because I'd stopped trusting your judgment, Theo. I built Circuit Sync because I remember exactly how long those old phone confirmations used to take during a bad storm, and how many extra minutes a family sat without heat while 3 dispatchers played phone tag verifying a switch position. I wanted a version of this job that didn't cost people that time, and I think I let that wanting outrun how thoroughly the underlying data could actually be trusted, right up until tonight. I know that, Uncle Warren. I'm not angry at you for wanting to get people their power back faster. I've stood in enough freezing kitchens telling families it'll be a few more hours to understand exactly why you built this. I'm telling you that the one time it mattered, a confirmed status that looked completely clean on a screen was asking my crew to trust a fact that a damaged relay 2 miles away had quietly stopped being true hours earlier, and the only reason Nate's not the one who found that out with his hands instead of a hot stick is that grounding a line myself, every single time, isn't a step I've ever once been willing to make optional, dashboard or no dashboard. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the downed line still sitting energized in the freezing dark, work crews now converging from both utilities to properly de-energize it at the source, and I watched him run the same calculation I imagined he'd been running since the regional alert woke him, the particular executive's math of how many other cross-utility confirmations, across 2 clean storm seasons and 3 interconnected grids, might have carried the same invisible single point of failure gap without one crew foreman's refusal to skip a physical test happening to catch it in time. I keep thinking about the version of tonight where Nate started that splice before you got the hot stick out, he said, finally, his breath fogging in the freezing air, or the version where you'd stopped insisting on the ground test after that dinner a year ago, because I outranked the argument on paper even if I never once outranked it in the field. I don't like sitting with how much of tonight came down to you personally deciding a rule couldn't ever become optional, no matter how good the system telling you otherwise looked. I don't love sitting with that either, Uncle Warren. A system this good shouldn't need one foreman's stubborn insistence on a physical test as its last line of defense before a live line gets treated like a dead one. That's not a compliment to me, it's a description of exactly the gap we both need to close. You built something genuinely good across 2 seasons. And I've never once told this crew otherwise, but genuinely good isn't the same as verified all the way down, and I think somewhere in the last year you let yourself believe those were closer to the same thing than tonight ever should have let either of us assume. Ridgeline Cooperative's communications relay failure led to a full independent audit of every automatic tie switch reporting path feeding into Circuit Sync across all 3 utilities, uncovering 2 additional relays with degraded storm reliability ratings that hadn't yet failed but were flagged for immediate replacement rather than waiting out their full service life. What my uncle and I built together over the following months, working with engineers from all 3 utilities, was a mandatory physical verification flag added directly into Circuit Sync's work order system, automatically requiring a documented hot stick test before any crew contact on lines involving a cross-utility tie configuration, regardless of how clean the automated confirmation looked, closing the exact gap that had let 2 otherwise excellent storm seasons of engineering trust a single unverified data path further than the underlying equipment actually warranted. I still ground every line myself before my crew touches it, exactly as I did the night before Circuit Sync existed and exactly as I will the night after whatever replaces it, though Nate, I've noticed, has stopped reaching for the splicing tools before the hot sticks come out even once since that January storm. My uncle and I still argue about grid automation most Sundays, over the same kitchen table our whole family's eaten dinner at for 3 generations, except the conversation carries a specific new weight neither of us fully had before that ice storm. He told me once that the hardest part of the whole episode wasn't the audit or the engineering fix at all, it was sitting with how completely 2 clean storm seasons had let him trust a single automated confirmation path as thoroughly as he had. Right up until his own nephew's refusal to ever once skip a physical test finally kept a genuine equipment failure from becoming something considerably worse than a very cold night and a very long report. A downed line doesn't care what a dashboard says about it, and what I've learned, watching a system my own uncle built get this one thing wrong for 2 years before finally getting it right, is that the most dangerous gap in a genuinely well-built system is often the one sitting quietly inside a piece of somebody else's equipment, reporting a fact that used to be true right up until the exact storm that made it stop being true. It took a failed relay 2 miles away, a hot stick in freezing dark, and an uncle and nephew who trusted each other enough to argue honestly across a family dinner table a year before it mattered, to finally close a gap that 2 otherwise excellent storm seasons had never quite found their way to on their own.